South Africa is no longer the second biggest economy in Africa. A report by the International Monetary Fund, that's the IMF, has revealed we've been overtaken by Egypt. South Africa ceded its position as the continent's powerhouse when Nigeria revalued its economy 2 years ago. The local economy has been hammered by slow growth and a weaker rand. Well, let's unpack the implications of being number 3 in Africa with Dr. Azar Jammine, Director and Chief Economist at Econometrics. Dr. Jammine, good morning and thank you very much for coming in this morning.
Good morning.
Does it matter that we are number 3 out of 50-odd countries in Africa?
Yes and no. I think it matters in the sense that psychologically people see us as being a smaller economy. We stand to gradually lose a bit of ground in terms of our political influence, and through that our economic influence in the country and in relations with other regions. But yes, you're quite right. One shouldn't bank everything on a single measure of the size of the economy, which is GDP measured in US dollars. And we know that one of the main reasons why we've fallen behind Egypt now is because the rand has depreciated so sharply, whereas the Egyptian monetary authorities control the value of their currency. And so the rand has fallen sharply against the Egyptian pound, which means that we have actually become extremely much more competitive against Egyptian products than we were before.
Yeah, the slump in oil prices that we saw recently does not seem to have affected Nigeria's economic growth.
No, the slump in oil prices has affected Nigeria's economic growth, but therein lies part of the rub. Nigeria's economic growth is coming down from about 6% to between 2 and 4%, which is still higher than South Africa's growth of 0.5% or so. And the same can be said of Egypt with the riots that we've seen over recent years. Yes, they damaged growth, but growth has still carried on at levels higher than those of South Africa. And little by little, if you compound that over a period of time, you're bound eventually to get the kind of situation we're getting.
Globally, though, we look at emerging economies across the world, but let's focus on Africa. It looks like recently there's been a revision of growth across the board from those numbers like in Egypt, 6% to 2% overall. I mean, they are not doing very well. What's the cause of that? Is commodity prices the main reason?
The main cause is commodity prices, but Africa does face other headwinds. Its human capital resources are still very weak, and so long as they remain weak, it will be vulnerable to exploitation by foreign interests, and the notion of colonialism will remain. And until such time as Africans can start producing massively goods and services that they need, instead of having to import them with money that with foreign exchange they earn from selling commodities, I think this element of vulnerability to colonialism is going to stay.
We see the words or the noises coming out of Kigali at the World Economic Forum for Africa over the last couple of days. It's wrapping up today, talking about the need to develop more infrastructure in Africa, keep the capital's outflows low, or keep the money in Africa. We saw Deputy President Ramaphosa saying that earlier in a clip, that we want to keep the money in Africa so it can work for us in Africa. Infrastructure development, we're facing a new knowledge economy, digital revolution. Keeping the capital in Africa, making it work for us, is that the right way?
It is the right way, but the only way you're going to encourage that is to develop your own human capital resources.
So skills become very important.
Absolutely. You need to become less dependent on foreign skills. That doesn't mean you must stop foreign skills. On the contrary, you need them for transfer of skills purposes, but you need to become less dependent internally on
education.
Absolutely, and we are falling further and further behind other African countries in that regard.
As a country. Okay, just a broad question. As an economist, I need to ask you this because it cropped up to my mind the way you answered the question firstly when you said that we shouldn't hang everything about being number 3 on one factor in terms of influence. Is GDP still a good measure of economic growth? There's been a lot of discussion by economists worldwide to say perhaps we start to looking at new human-centered economic indicators.
Absolutely, one has to look at other forms of measurement as well. There is no one unitary one. But I think it says a lot that South Africa, unlike Nigeria and Egypt, is rated, its government bonds are rated investment grade status, whereas Egypt and Nigeria are junk status. It says a lot that South Africa on the World Competitiveness Report Index is still way above Egypt and Nigeria because they're measuring other things than just GDP in those analyses. So yes, I think it's a wake-up call. I think we need to realize that we are falling behind, but it's not going to destroy our economy because we've become now the third largest economy in Africa.
Thank you very much. Dr. Zar Jamin, Director and Chief Economist at Econometrics.